Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us bright and early on this Wednesday morning. My name is Henk Pretorius. I'm the co-founder of Columinate, the SA agency that joined forces with Insights 3 years ago. Today, I'm a managing partner who looks after a global team that manages our consumer networks. I'm joined today by Yuri, a next-gen expert and co-founder of Insights Consulting, Lily, a trends expert in our culture and trends team, and Katya, our methodology expert. Together, we will be taking you today through a presentation about our trends report for this year entitled Rebound and Rebalance. This South African edition is a focused and abbreviated version of a much more complete report that covers 10 trends across 17 markets. So starting the session today, Katya will introduce you to the report and how we went about conducting the extensive research that underlies the insights we'll share. Then we'll introduce you to 5 trends we've picked out specifically for South Africa. Yuri and Lily will introduce each trend, share some global examples of how they play out elsewhere before I give you some South African specific examples. What we hope to do is inspire and challenge you to think about how these trends and the examples are relevant to your brand and category. Finally, I will close with some advice on how you can take this trend thinking forward with some specific research approaches and how to think about applying this in your future work. Now, just to let you know, since we wanted to keep the session to an hour, we won't take questions in the session, but instead we ask that you email your questions to us to the email address, which is askusanything@insightsconsulting.com. That's askusanything@insightsconsulting.com. And we'll put it up on the slide at the end of the presentation, so you've got that visible as well. So please sit back, don't relax too much, and enjoy the session with us. I'll hand over now to Katya to explain the background and our approach to uncovering these trends. Over to you, Katya.
Yes, thank you. So as Henk mentioned, just like last year, we bundled what we found are the key consumer trends for the year to come. And this year's report is themed Rebound and Rebalance, because 2021 was the year of collective readjustment. If we go back to the first year of the pandemic, you could say that we were all in this waiting game for the new normal, the going back to normal, whichever you want to call it. However, the enduring pandemic reality and the continuous outbursts of natural disasters made people accept the ongoing uncertainty and reclaim their lives. And for some, this meant pivoting things on a personal level. We have seen people moving houses, moving homes. In fact, in South Africa, we see the semi-migration trends where people are moving to more remote coastal areas. But we also see people making a move on a professional level. 2021 is also labeled as the Great Resignation, a trend that started in the US with more than 24 million people having quit their jobs in a period of 6 months. However, also in South Africa, we see that staff turnover has increased by 16% in a post-pandemic afterlife. So we see people making these life-changing decisions, while on the other hand, we see people focusing on small tweaks and rituals in order to regain balance. So 2021 is the year where people try to find this balance between the short term on one hand, really living in the moment, embracing these small moments of joy, and also the long term, where you see that people still need this way of finding stability by planning ahead and planning for the future. And it's this duality, balancing of purpose versus pleasure, which people seek to fulfill in order to achieve happiness. And happiness is the ultimate goal in life. And it's also at the forefront of our culture and trends human drivers model. A model that we use as a framework in all our trends work and also with the creation of this report. And at the core of this model are the 7 human drivers of happiness. Positive psychology shows us that there's 7 universal drivers which people seek to fulfill in order to achieve happiness. And while their core remains unchanged, the way they're manifested in our behavior is influenced by the world around us. As you can see, we've color coded each of these drivers, and you will see these colors also coming back when we introduce you the different trends. And you will see the same when we send you the reports after this event. Now, these colors will show you what are the underlying drivers for each of the trends. In this year's if we look at last year's reports, there we saw that the drivers such as relationship, health, and security were at the forefront of our minds battling through the pandemic. This year's report, we see that drivers such as achievement, which links to purpose, and positive emotion, which links to pleasure, are core drivers as we are reevaluating how we spend our time and energy in a world where uncertainty is basically the only given. Now, taking this framework in mind, methodology-wise, what did we do? Well, we started with a qualitative exploration together with our network of leading-edge consumers. And as you can see here, we connected with our Illume network from all corners of the world, and this led to the identification of 10 consumer trends for 2022. Now, if we look at last year's report, some of these trends are completely new, while others are evolutions of trends that we defined last year. Now, as researchers, we not only wanted to know which trends are manifesting across the globe, but also how this happens. And this is why we quantified these trends with more than 15,000 consumers in 17 markets, including South Africa. And for that, we used our proprietary research panel. And for the others, we connected with our field partner, Dynata, to conduct this big research and quantification. And this quantification allows us to score each of these trends on consumer attitudes and behavior, and allows us to plot these trends on those two parameters, resulting in 4 quadrants, obviously, each representing a different attitudinal and behavioral adoption. And plotting these trends also on this quadrant shows us where a trend is in its life stage. Attitude reflects the extent that people identify with the trend. Behavior reflects the extent that people act upon the trend. Looking at the global mapping, let me explain you what each of these quadrants represents. So bottom left, we have what we label as nascent trends. These are trends that have a low behavioral and attitudinal adoption. So you could say these represent more leading edge ways of thinking. So if you want to do something completely new in your category, this is a great place to start. Bottom right, we have what we label as emerging trends. These are trends with a high attitudinal adoption, but low in behavior, meaning people engage with the idea, but are not yet acting upon it. So here brands can really help convert these ideas into actions. Top right, we have what we label as expanding trends. These are trends that are really gaining momentum. A top trend here is considered rituals, which links to what I mentioned before, that people are seeking to regain balance by integrating these small rituals in their lives. And then top left, we have what we label as establishing trends. And these are trends that are becoming a normal part of life. And here we find a trend linked to sustainability being a core theme throughout society, a well-recognized theme. However, people still feeling the need to act upon it. Now, because of time reasons, we won't be able to go into depth into all of these 10 trends. We will send you the full report after the session today, so have a look there. But for the scope of this session, looking also at the mapping for South Africa, we will focus on 5 trends which we feel are interesting to highlight here today. We'll look at inclusive connectivity as a trend, which is in looking at South Africa is in the nascent area. However, if we look at other markets, for example, as in the Asian region, there we see it as in the expanding area, making it a very interesting one because we feel it will gain momentum in the year to come. In the establishing area, we'll look at extending life, which is also an establishing trend on a global level. However, we'll also tap into resilient structures, which interestingly in South Africa is in the establishing area, showing people are acting upon it while it is still nascent in other parts of the world. We'll also look in the expanding area to uncompromised values, where it's a trend where South Africa is leading the way in comparison to other markets in the globe. And then we'll look at the top trends where South Africa is also really leading the way, considered rituals, which Lily will tell you all about now.
Thank you so much, Katya, and good morning, everyone. Great to see you all here. So yeah, as Katya said, let's start with the most prominent expanding trend that we see coming through overall, considered rituals. And this trend is grounded in our human drivers of health and achievement. So as Katya said, with our hearts increasingly set on finding a balanced life, more than ever, people are proactively setting up rituals to manage their minds, moods, and energy levels, with the ultimate purpose being to achieve our accomplishments and to feel well. And this trend is a result of long-term shifts we're seeing in culture towards more well-being centric living, but also it has been accelerated in recent pandemic months and has kind of shifted form a little bit. And it's moved away from this kind of more pressurized self-optimization wellness trend that we saw a couple of years ago. And instead, it's now about setting kind of realistic daily habits that best support our internal rhythms and cycles. And globally, this is a trend that is, really peaking. And what we're seeing as trends consultants working with kind of global brands and sectors around the world is that everyone's kind of speaking to this trend, but the heartland of this trend really is in sectors like FMCG, beauty, skincare, food and drink as well. But kind of the holistic nature of the trend means that pretty much any sector can play there. But the challenge is finding a meaningful way to ritualize daily habits and experiences. So, for example, if we look at the lesser served sectors on the right hand side here, so transport and travel and automotive, there's no reason why you can't kind of be thinking about rituals here, because ritualizing your daily drive or your train route is something that people do, and we could do more interesting things with moving forward. So yeah, just to kind of make the point really with this trend, because it is so prominent in culture, we need to, as brands, really make sure that the messages that we're putting through are unique and the solutions are really meaningful, because there's a lot of similar ideas operating in this space. So to provide a bit of inspiration for you, let's first take a look at the rapidly growing world of digital therapies. So having regular interactions with professional therapists and counselors is really becoming normalized in kind of across the globe, particularly with millennial generations and younger. And what we're seeing now is thousands of kind of startups with lots of financial backing really starting to grow in this space. And one leading example is Talkspace, a US-based company who speak about having a therapist in your pocket, and they enable people to schedule regular sessions from the comfort of their own home and kind of book them in as and when they need them. And we really expect more people in the future to look for these kind of daily, weekly, monthly solutions to well-being. And the key will be making sure that your app or your digital experience is really, really easy to integrate. Now let's look at a category that has long been associated with rituals, tea. So, of course, tea kind of ceremonies, as from Japan to India, have a lot of kind of imbued ritualistic meaning. But what we're seeing in recent years is kind of the commercial category starting to push this a lot further in how they're communicating their products and brands. So, to illustrate that, let's look at Mood Tea, which is a Gen Z designed brand, which is all about raising awareness of suicide prevention and mental health challenges in society. And what's interesting with this brand is that they put that message at the very heart and front of of how they talk about themselves as a brand, really showing that kind of ritual is about more than kind of nice things to do during your day. It's about something that is much deeper and much more important for us as human beings. And when we look at the kind of actual product ranges that they offer, they use terminologies like self-kindness, slowness, and intimacy, which I think really takes the kind of the meaning a lot further than kind of more general ideas like mindfulness, which we see everywhere. So there's a couple of bits of inspiration from a global perspective. Henk, will you zoom in on the results from a South Africa point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lily. So let's look at this trend from a local perspective. I think what's really interesting, and Lily mentioned this earlier, is that this is one of those trends that sits squarely in the expanding category. So attitudes and behaviors are pulling towards this across the globe. From a South African point of view, we're absolutely no different. And in fact, if you look at where we sit, we're in that top cluster of regions where this trend is evident. So this is as true if you look at the trend score at the bottom right of the younger next-gen segment in the country as it is of the overall market. So clearly this focus on wellness rituals is a key concern for people locally as well. And this is not unexpected because according to South African data from Alexander Forbes Health Management Solutions, 60% of companies experienced an increase in disability claims for mental and behavioral medical conditions. Now, unfortunately, this has been one of those effects from the pandemic and the resulting restrictions that have affected everyone, but impacted negatively, especially the mental health of many. So as a result, the traditional way we look at health, which has been mostly physical health, freedom from physical illness, has to be revised to include mental health, especially now. To give you one example that's quite close to home for us, certainly at Insights, we as a company have decided to add the concept of wellness days so that each staff member can take a day every quarter to focus on themselves and their mental and physical health. So the question is, do we see any local brands playing in this area? Well, with the increased time spent at home, often isolated or overwhelmed, Discovery Vitality launched a mental well-being channel with a proposition that simply says, stay home, stay mindful, stay rewarded. And while Discovery is famous for innovating and rewarding healthy behaviors, this heightened focus and inclusion of mental health in this definition is relatively new. So on this channel, if you go and visit, people can get access to everything from reviewing their mental health with an assessment, viewing videos on yoga and meditation, to even getting points and rewards for completing mindfulness activities, including integrating certain apps within the main Discovery app. In our research, what I must say is interesting on other companies, we found it very telling that despite the clear importance of this trend observed in the data, relatively few other companies were offering similar initiatives. Well, I should rather say we're very vocal about offering similar initiatives, which in our view represents a big opportunity. Perhaps it's only because these are not as public or as well known as those by Discovery. So if you know of these initiatives your brand are facilitating, please drop us an email afterwards. We'd love to hear about it. But now we move on to the next trend called extending life.
Yes, thank you, Henk. So this second trend we will share with you today is called extending life, as Henk mentioned, and it's linked to two human drivers that Katja has explained already. The one is engagement, and the other one is looking for more meaningfulness in life. From rising environmental concerns around mass consumption on one hand and a growing eco-anxiety globally, there comes the new demand for more durable and more long-lasting products. And I think preferring quality over quantity is also one of the results of the global interpandemic self-reflection, with consumers now taking pride in extending the life of products rather than just throwing them away and disposing them. They want to extend the life of the products they're using. As you can see on the global mapping, this trend is rapidly going mainstream in most markets across the globe, except for the Chinese region in general, where it is still a nascent trend. And as this trend is all about circularity, using second-hand, recycled or recyclable products, and durability, using first life products for a longer time, it's no surprise if you look at the right-hand side of the slide to see consumer electronics, fashion and home improvement indicated as the main sector playing fields. Let's have a look at some examples. IKEA in Norway did this campaign that you can see for the moment. It's quite daring because they're showing discarded IKEA products dumped on streets and in junkyards even, to raise the awareness about the 3 million pieces of furniture that are thrown away in Norway each year. And of course, also to show that its products are worth repairing as they keep their value. You can see that by the reference prices shown in the ads. On IKEA's campaign website in Norway, visitors can learn more about the buyback scheme that IKEA has in place. They can get price quotes for specific pieces they own, and they can also order spare parts whenever they want to repair their own IKEA furniture. In fashion, there is the UK designer Stella McCartney, who made a lingerie and swimwear hybrid collection to make people buy less items and wear the same pieces more often, either as underwear, but also for swimming, same piece, or for a yoga class. Meanwhile, there's a brand called Petit Pli that is experimenting with clothing that grows with the wearer. Founder Ryan Mario Yassin, who is an aeronautical engineer, is using the fabric's pleated nature to adapt to the changing body shapes, making the same item useful for children between 6 and 36 months. And normally they would cover 6 different clothing sizes. Inspired by re-commerce sites like ThreadUp, Depop, and Vinted, H&M is piloting rewear in Canada, making it very easy to buy and sell used fashion items, not only from H&M, as you can see on the visual, but from any brands, even from competitive brands, Tommy Hilfiger, etc. The algorithm on the website recommends you a competitive price, and H&M just takes a 15% commission on the sales. In an interview with Vogue, Pierre-Alexis Dumas, who is the artistic director of Hermès, and also great-great-great-grandson of Thierry Hermès, the founder of Hermès, referred to his grandfather, who was defining luxury already back in the 1960s as that which you can repair, stressing the fact that new luxury has sustainability at the core of it. And in New Zealand, Sheep Included was creating these fine carbon negative merino wool sweaters. I'm wearing one today, but I'm not sponsored, or not yet. They are offering a generational guarantee, as they mention it on their website, which means that for a lifetime, you can mend it or you can send it back for maintenance whenever it is really needed. But then real infinite life cycles of physical stuff is quite difficult because there's a wear out effect anyway. But NFTs or non-fungible tokens or other pure digital goodies, well, they can offer the real infinite life cycle. And Gucci, for instance, started with Gucci Garden on gaming platform Roblox, quite a popular gaming platform with young people, selling this Queen Bee Dionysus handbag, which would cost you, when you would buy it physically in a Gucci store, $3,400 US. And it costs you on Roblox, it costed you only $5.50 for a limited time. And although you could only show it off virtually in Roblox, so it's not a real NFT, it turned out to be quite a good investment, as there was some girl able to resell this pure digital handbag for $4,115, widely surpassing the price of the original physical handbag. Beyond fashion and pressured by the right to repair movement and legislation, Apple recently announced self-service repair, finally allowing consumers to access original Apple parts and tools to repair their own Apple devices. Meanwhile, there's this consumer electronics company Framework to the left-hand side of the slide that has released a modular laptop, giving a customer full access to the hardware system that allows them to fix and upgrade their own computers whenever they desire. And then the last global example comes from beauty or personal care. It's a Danish startup called Last Object that is creating reusable alternatives for single-use hygiene and beauty products. They started in 2018. They're funded via Kickstarter. And at first, they introduced an eco-friendly alternative to the disposable cotton swabs you can see to the left-hand side of the slide. Currently, there are produced 1.5 billion a day of these disposable cotton swabs, and they often get flushed in toilets and end up in the sea, as they don't, because they're so small, they don't get caught by filtration systems. In the meantime, the brand also developed lost tissue that can be washed up to 520 times. And the one you see playing for the moment on the screen is Last Round, the home compostable zero waste facial pads. So that's for the global examples, but Henk, I believe you will zoom in on the South African results again for this trend as well.
Absolutely, thank you, Yuri. What's interesting relative to the other trends and to other markets is that South Africa's attraction to this theme of extending the life of things we purchase is fairly low. It's sitting on that border between the nascent and the establishing categories. So South Africa shares this position with emerging markets like Brazil and China, in contrast to the high importance of this theme in European countries such as Belgium, France, and Germany. So for this trend, what we want to do is explore those incumbents and startups that are increasing the focus on sustainable purchasing, looking at initiatives in the areas of children's toys and secondhand fashion and thrifting. So while we do this, I'd encourage you to think about, even if it's not your category, about if and how your brands can leverage off this trend that has not yet gone mainstream in South Africa yet, but clearly is a global trend worth watching. Starting with the first example, now as a parent to a 4 and a 1-year-old, I know all too well how quickly toys collect, get used for a while, and then ultimately abandoned. Now, realizing this is a universal trend, one of South Africa's toy stores, Toy Kingdom, partnered with Safripol, the second largest polymer producer in sub-Saharan Africa, with the goal of reusing, repurposing, and recycling pre-loved toys for underprivileged children. A fantastic initiative, not just because it achieves the sustainability objective of extending life, but also because it has this charitable dimension, which is great to see in a country like ours. Finally, I must say on this trend, even if it doesn't mean it's necessarily easy to convince a 4-year-old to part with these unused toys, as my wife and I found out while we were caught trying to sneak out with the toys one afternoon. But let's move from toys to fashion, where some recent events in the local fashion space have shown people increasingly interested in thrifting or secondhand or gently used fashion items. And this is very similar to trends that Yuri showed earlier on a global scale, of course, slightly less mature in South Africa at this stage. So 2 websites called Petite Fox and Encore Clothing are 2 recently established online stores, started with the aim of giving a second life to clothes and protesting the fast fashion trend that remains popular locally. Thrift by Flav is a brick and mortar store in the Mall of Africa, offering a curated and hand-selected offering of pre-worn items. So while this trend is far from mainstream in South Africa, it at least asks the question whether we are seeing the rise of a trend with these initial signs. But next up, we have one of the strongest trends we observed in South Africa called uncompromised values.
Great, thank you very much, Henk. So an important part of the pandemic impact has been clarifying what's most important to us as people and as consumers. And what we're finding is that people are becoming much less willing or able, in fact, to compromise on their core values. And underlying this trend of uncompromised values is the human drivers for achievement and also security. So what makes us feel safe and secure. So to give you a bit of context around this trend, with many markets around the world struggling financially and with prices going up, we have become highly conscious of what costs are being passed on to the end consumer. And we have become more strong in our perspective on what is fair and what is not. And that's money, but beyond money, we have also become more strict with our most precious resource, our time, as people have started to no longer accept ideas like the 9 to 5 or the standard commute as kind of, things that we have to do. Instead, people are looking for smarter and more rewarding ways to spend their time. And in the future, we can expect values like, radical flexibility for the consumer and also transparent fairness for the kind of the citizen as being values that we expect to see from brands into the future. And looking at the global picture, we can see that this trend is expanding in markets that are particularly high in terms of financial inequality and instability. So, for example, markets like Brazil. We can also see, as Henk said, that this is a very prominent trend in South Africa, and Henk will tell you a little bit more about that shortly. From a sector point of view, groceries is the biggest sector playing field for this trend, which makes sense given the visibility of kind of price shifts and like inequalities in this field. But similarly also for financial services, which of course is all about maximizing our value, monetary value. So to illustrate, let's take a look at an example from each of these sectors. So in the UK, we're currently going through a cost of living crisis where price increases are impacting the poorest people among us. And this month, we saw anti-poverty campaigner Jack Monroe point out that the value ranges, so the most basic ranges in the big supermarkets, were facing the sharpest price increases versus the more premium ranges that were on offer alongside them. And her campaign went viral on platforms like Twitter and led to the 4 big supermarkets being really kind of called out by thousands of people. What was interesting was that Asda was the only retailer to really kind of meaningfully react so far. And what they did is that they first of all acknowledged the problem, and then they pledged to do kind of a price capping, and they also pledged to stock more of the basic range in the areas where people most needed it as well. And Jack, who is very much a kind of an ardent campaigner and not somebody who is nice to brands necessarily, actually thanked Asda for their response, and she got upset and very emotional on television talking about it, and praised them for what they'd done. And I think this is a really nice example of a positive outcome, a brand who's kind of potentially in hot water for not supporting people's values can turn that around, and really, when they really react decisively and show that they do care. And another tactic, I guess, for tapping into these kind of newly uncompromising values that people have is to acknowledge those very real problems that are operating in the systems that brands are within. So in finance, for example, we can see that a lot of Gen Z targeted brands in particular are talking more openly about capitalism as a concept, while still kind of operating within that and offering kind of financial solutions that are capitalist by nature. So a really good example is Clio, which is a US-based financial brand, digital-led, and they talk about offering you a budget that doesn't suck and gives you hacks, memes, and rants against capitalism as well. So as you can see from the image on the right, lots of funny kind of irreverent content along with the kind of a really strong financial service. And I think in the kind of post-COVID era, or the inter-COVID era, perhaps, people are more skeptical than ever. And we need to speak to them in a way that doesn't gloss over the realities of the kind of cultural conversations that they are having online. And if we try and do that and get past those kind of glossier messages, we're able to show that we are more progressive in our thinking, and we're part of these culture shifts rather than being part of what some people, particularly younger consumers, potentially see as the problem. Henk, what's happening in South Africa?
So now we're back to a trend where South Africans really show a much closer connection than most other regions, and that's in this area of uncompromised values. So this trend is all about retaining the things that emerged as significant to us during the pandemic, the savings of time, money, and convenience. And of course, the ways in which we want to live our lives in the future as a result of being forced to reflect on and change our behaviors over the last 2 years. The first example is a clear winner from the pandemic, which was Checkers 60/60, that has completely disrupted the grocery delivery scene with a far superior offering to what has been available before. As you'll see in the short ad about the service, they play strongly on the savings in time, money, and hassle associated with a typical store visit.
Checkers 60/60, the delivery app that does the heavy lifting for you. Now, is it the best way to get groceries and drinks? Well, that depends. Do you like saving time and money? How about taking the mission out of shopping for brekkie? Bruno. Good boy. Shh, baby. or the braai. And getting it fresh in 60 minutes at Checkers' famously low prices. Now, who else does that? Nobody. That's right. So get the app and shop in 60 seconds. And let Checkers deliver it in just 60 minutes. Because getting stuff tomorrow is so yesterday.
So it's a fun little ad that plays on a lot of these themes, right? Saving time, saving money, saving your hassle. And in my view, they've also come up with one of the best taglines to come out of the pandemic. This getting stuff tomorrow is so yesterday. And that is the point about many of the changes we have seen during the pandemic. What worked yesterday before the last 2 years won't work for us in the future. And these new values are evident, of course, in other trends as well, such as what Katja mentioned earlier, this increasing semi-migration trend. South Africans, like people globally, are looking to move away from the big cities to Zoom towns and leave the hustle and bustle behind. For me, I have to wonder if everyone really does this. Will these places really be quiet? But be that as it may, the state agencies are quoting huge increases in people moving away from Gauteng to smaller inland and coastal towns. So while the effect of this for brands in the short term seems limited to increases in revenue for estate agents and moving companies, there are some secondary effects that could be considered. Brands that have historically had to serve people in densely populated areas may now face distribution and availability challenges in these small towns. And of course, lower volumes coming from large metros where most of the infrastructure currently sits. This is in addition to the migration of workforces and the work from home trend that companies like all of us have to contend with now and in the future. So even if this trend is not influencing your sector yet, I think now would be the right time to ask how it might do in the future. Next, we have a trend that should feel familiar to all of us who are more digitally connected than ever before. Inclusive connectivity is up next, and Yuri will tell you more about it.
Yes, I will. Thank you, Henk. If there is one thing the pandemic has taught us all, it is that technology can really bring people together. But our ways of connecting are diversifying, both in the workplace, but also socially, with more priority now given to accommodating everyone's needs. This inclusive connectivity trend is currently stronger present and expanding among the youngest generations, next gen, so the millennials and Generation Z or Z around the world, but also in Asia and the general population, while it is still being nascent for other age groups in other regions. It is a stressful time to be young, experiencing lockdowns, social isolation, remote education, quarantines. So it's not a coincidence that most of the trends that we found scored significantly higher among young generations are driven by the positive emotions driver. And while social media do give youth a way to stay connected in these difficult times, safety online and inclusivity specifically can still be a problem. And I think brands can play a role there by creating safe collaborative spaces, streaming or other initiatives for people to feel a stronger sense of belonging in the moment, even while they are physically apart. Some examples of inclusive connectivity. Blue Fever is an app backed by Serena Williams, and it's a virtual support community allowing young people to express themselves freely and safely and anonymously with a community of supportive, inclusive, and like-minded people. Emily Floors, when she was only 15 years old, Generation Z for sure, decided to launch Cripple Media, giving space to young disabled people to write opinions and share experiences from their own perspectives. Cripple Media is completely self-funded, and it is striving to train young disabled media professionals to lead conversations also in mainstream media. Generation Z are balancing online and offline communities. So the physical and the digital are not two separate worlds to them, but they can be layered. And there are many online communities where strangers are sharing how long they're studying, what they're studying, to monitor and motivate each other to keep studying hard. This is one example on the slide from James Scholz, who has a daily live stream of studying 12 hours in a row but is reaching over 400,000 subscribers on YouTube. Acknowledging the accessible and honest two-way communication that video gaming and avatars are offering to young people, employers in South Korea are turning to recruitment fairs in the metaverse, pure virtually, to engage millennials and Gen Z job hunters. And this is an example of Lotte Engineering and Construction. It was the first company to hold a virtual recruitment fair using Gather Town, with more than 400 job seekers taking part virtually. And the online event recreated in a virtual way, some of the company's most famous building projects, including the one you can see on the slide, the Lotte World Tower. The tool that they're using is Gather, and Gather is a video chat platform that is designed to make virtual interactions more human, with metaverse layers where people can work, socialize, and learn together. So just like in a game setting, like in Minecraft, you can create your own avatar, but also your own private desk at the office with, if that is something you like, a Japanese pond around your desk full of koi fish. Meanwhile, creating a more inclusive metaverse is high on the agenda of avatar creation companies like DNA Block, for instance. This is an LA-based company, and they are making it easier for creators to build high-quality 3D avatars that reflect diversity. They just received $1.2 million funds from the Japanese mobile internet and finance player SoftBank. And SoftBank has also invested in the South Korean mobile metaverse app Zepeto, which is quite popular. It has 2 million active daily users in Asia, mainly consisting of a 70% female and Generation Z user base. Now, while the link with media, entertainment, and consumer electronics and inclusive connectivity is an obvious one, and where the playing fields, this trend can also be interesting to finance, for instance. And crypto and NFTs are addressing needs of previously uncovered age and target groups, and especially the younger ones. So in November 2021, NFT marketplace OpenSea reported over $10 billion of total volume in collectible NFTs. And we can already see on the slide some inclusive initiatives. For instance, Malia Abidi, a female artist, writer, and activist, created Women Rise. It's a unique collection of 10,000 NFTs featuring female activists, artists, scientists, programmers, and more. And another female-led NFT collection called Boss Beauties, also on the slide. It was featured on the NASDAQ billboard, you can see about in the middle of the screen. They featured it on International's Girls' Day, and the collection was sold out in 90 minutes, and they were auctioning them to fund scholarships and mentoring programs for women in the financial sector. And one specific NFT that actually also got a physical print, you could say, you can see that to the left bottom corner of the slide, will be kept displayed in front of the iconic Muriel Siebert boardroom in New York, which honors the first woman to have a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. And then the last global example of inclusive connectivity, before we have a look at the South African results, comes from food service and from Brazil. This is Tras Favela, and it is a Google-supported food delivery startup supporting local businesses, especially those in peripheral areas and slums where other services wouldn't reach. So it is inclusive and it is connective in many different ways of the world. Now, Henk, I will give you the word back to have a deep dive on the South African situation of this trend.
Yeah, happy to do that. For inclusive connectivity, we see South Africans somewhere between the nascent and emerging categories. And as Yuri pointed out, next gens are where we see this trend being particularly evident, also slightly more so in South Africa. Now, when it comes to digital inclusiveness, South Africa has historically had a big digital divide between those with access to the latest information and communication technology and those without. Fortunately, this has and continues to change at a rapid pace. I like to look back at when we started Columinate in 2008, when internet penetration was 8%. That's not a number I'll easily forget because so many people were constantly throwing this at us who felt that digital first businesses like ours at that stage were seen as irrelevant for a market that just wasn't ready yet. Today, internet access locally is well over 60%, and some sources claim as high as 70%. So much has changed positively in the last 14 years, but of course there remains work to do. And as you'll see in the next examples, some local brands are taking it on themselves to move this agenda forward. Firstly, while connecting online has accelerated for everyone, it feels like at least during the pandemic, most South African learners remain dependent on in-person education. Two initiatives from perhaps not the most obvious sources, Vodacom, the network operator, and investment bank Investec, have attempted to make schooling more digitized and inclusive. Vodacom's free eSchool for grades R to 12 registered an increase from 40,000 students to over 150,000 during the lockdowns. What's great about the inclusiveness of this is Vodacom subsidizes the data to access the platform and also offers this in 11 official languages, making it truly inclusive. Investec also extended its free Pro Maths program for underprivileged children during the last 2 years, and it pays for the data similar to Vodacom through an agreement with the network operators. So both of these are great and much needed initiatives that arose from the need for more inclusive connectivity in education. Further evidence of the drive towards inclusive connectivity comes from our annual digital banking benchmarking study called Satisfaction. We've run the study for a decade now, but recently we've seen some very interesting changes occur in the last 2 years. One of these has been the increase in new users to digital and mobile banking. Between 2019 and 2020, the number of new users who've used internet banking for less than 6 months doubled from 6% to 12%, and it was nowhere near those numbers in previous years. In 2021, we were really interested to see that this number was sustained, showing this attraction to digital banking hasn't waned after that initial surge. So while South Africa has always had a mature digital banking offering from many of the banks, this recent uptick in usage shows an inflection point with more users leaving behind the brick and mortar offline banking world for the more convenient digital one, also making banking more inclusive and connected. Now, my next example is from a completely different category. This is a company and a platform called AgriCool, which is an online agricultural marketplace that links growers and buyers to a fair and reliable market. According to the founder of the startup, this came about due to the frustrations of being a small-scale farmer himself. And I'll tell you exactly what he says, because I think he sums up the business pretty well. He said, "I would farm and lose most of my produce to spoilage due to lack of access to markets. I decided to quit farming so I could solve these key problems in the agri value chain. With AgriCool, we work with both formal and informal markets. Street vendors can get their fresh produce delivered to them, saving them time and transportation costs, while we link formal small farmers with market access opportunities." So this is a great example of making access to markets more inclusive using an e-platform where you might not typically expect it, with informal and small-scale farming. Next, we have our final trend, one which resonates really strongly with South Africans, called resilient structures.
Thank you, Henk. So yes, our final trend, resilient structures. So the ongoing insecurity of the globe today is producing this trend, really. And what it's all about is designing resilient structures where people can feel safe and secure and feel well in their environments. So whether that be about retail environments or about home security innovations, brands can play various different roles in supporting this feeling of kind of inner confidence from a mental resilience perspective and collective safety from a security driver perspective. And where is this trend coming from? Of course, it's this idea of kind of insecurity, but also it's to do with this kind of shift away from kind of more productivity-led design in how we kind of think about, our travel spaces or our environments, but also moving towards a more kind of sustainability and security and health-centric way of thinking about how we create our systems that we operate in. So when we look at the global data, this trend is actually largely nascent, so kind of low attitude and low behavior versus some of the other trends we've seen today. And the reason for this could be that those kind of ideas around purpose and play, which are kind of central to the report that we shared today, are more front of mind for people as individuals, and that actually right now these more kind of systemic and structural needs are a little bit overwhelming for people to focus on too much. Yet when we look at the macro situation around the world, we know that this need for resilience is very much there, and it is in the kind of cultural rhetoric, and brands must play an important role in driving that kind of future stability moving forward. From a sector point of view, money and energy, things that we really need for our basic needs, are kind of high sector playing fields here. But I guess what's interesting about both these is that they are innately unstable. So, we need that reassurance that, they're going to be resilient for us moving forward. And with energy going through a kind of global crisis at the moment, it makes sense that people in this sector and brands in this sector should be doing something that really focuses on this trend. But what can your brand do to help with this resilient structural need? So to really make an impact, we need to be thinking beyond our direct brand kind of lane, and instead thinking about cross-sector collaboration to make this meaningful. And a company that knows this really well is the SOM Foundation, SOM, in the US, who are an academically led body that has been set up to advance the design profession's ability to address the key issues of our time, so environmental issues, societal issues. And what we're seeing is a lot of these kind of academically led companies collaborating more with brands to produce more interesting and dynamic solutions to our problems. And to give you an example from something that the SOM Foundation did, their 2022 grand prize winning project was MycoKnit, which explored the opportunities using mycelium, so the kind of the roots of mushrooms, mycelium-based materials to create sustainable and biodegradable building materials for a range of different uses, from houses, public spaces, but all the way down to clothing as well. And the project is significant, both in its use of advanced materials, but also in its kind of collaborative approach. So I think a really interesting one to take learnings from. And another creative example of building resilient structures is Sonic Boom, a UK-based outdoor art installation, which helps connect people socially in urban areas post-pandemic with these lovely kind of sensory experiences that you can see here. And this example really shows that although this feels like quite a serious trend to be getting involved with, the executions don't necessarily have to be serious as well. They can be about bringing kind of lighter, softer moments of well-being and kind of shared security and safety through kind of playful executions and activations. So just because you're kind of a more playful brand, it doesn't mean that you can't do something that really helps people feel resilient too. So that's what's happening globally. Hopefully that's given you a bit of inspiration. Let's take a look specifically at the South Africa perspective.
Thank you, Lily. So South Africans show a very strong agreement with the need for these resilient structures, the things that make us feel secure, safe, and confident in our environments. In fact, this is one of the few trends for South Africa that is nudging towards this expanding category. We see next gen as well as older segments finding equal value in this trend. Now, it must be said, of course, in South Africa, a safe environment has a very specific meaning, with high crime rates being a constant concern. So I think South Africans potentially see this slightly differently than other countries. Now, there's Namola, which I think a lot of you might know is a mobile app that claims to be South Africa's most trusted app to keep you and your family safe. And it offers users assistance when an alert is activated on the app. And it acts as a sort of universal panic button. With concerns about response times from police services, the app aims to offer a more reliable option for those concerned about their personal and family safety. The app, already back in 2020, claimed over 400,000 users, and we can expect that has increased tremendously over the last 2 years. Now, of course, there are also many other ways in which the need to feel safe and secure can play out. One very important thing highlighted in the last 2 years is the cost of unexpected medical expenses. And while medical aids have always offered a level of security should the unforeseen occur, there are many who can't afford the monthly payments. Enter OE, which is a medical saving card that allows people to save into a card that can be used only for medical expenses. This essentially offers a more flexible way to be disciplined about saving for future medical costs. OIE was recently selected as one of the SA FinTech startups to share in the $1 million funding from AlphaCode, showing that also the investment community understands the need for resilient structures as it stands around medical costs. So these were the 5 trends we picked out for this session today. At the start, I encouraged you to ask yourself what each trend means for your brand, and I hope that this session has given you plenty of inspiration. In case you're wondering what happens next, we have a few pointers on how you can rebound and rebalance with your customers and get even closer to your target market. For example, by working with our culture and trends and semiotics department, of which Lily is a key member, we can help you understand which trends are relevant within your sector and how these may impact your brand strategy and positioning. And we can provide you with a cultural insights at both a global level, as well as narrow down to a more local perspective for each market you may be operating in. Recently, also with the joining of the specialist agency Space Doctors to the Insights Group, this offering has been bolstered even further. Insight communities continue to play a very important part in our offer, and some of you may already have existing ones. You can use them to help you gain a deeper understanding of how these trends are manifesting amongst your customers by recruiting a sample that reflects your customer base. After setting up your community, you can run qual and quant activities over time to generate, explore, and validate these trends amongst your market's customers. We did something very similar last year, actually, for one of our sustainability trends, nurturing nature, that we uncovered last year. We ran an insight community with Nestlé to help them capture consumers' attitudes about recycling in the moment. As such, the brand discovered a range of fresh insights on how they could better support the consumers' recycling efforts. And of course, you can go even further if you like. You can test and validate these trends with an even larger target audience to understand at what stage each trend is within your sector currently and how it will evolve in the years to come. For example, we did a diversity and inclusivity project with Philips, for which we combined social intelligence and the power of leading edge consumers to help Philips gain a better understanding of Black African American hair care and enable them to inspire and support a leading US retail partner in North America. And finally, you can take advantage of our creative crowdsourcing offer by co-creating innovations off the back of the most relevant trends within your sector, as well as refine your brand activation and CX assets. So I'll leave you today with one of these fun examples. We asked our ICA network of creative consumers to innovate in the toy category. So going back to the initial example of Toy Kingdom that I showed, while leveraging this theme of extending life. So we challenged them to help us solve the problem. How can we usefully extend the life of toys in this category? We had participants from over 20 different markets join this creative crowdsourcing contest, and it resulted in a bunch of great ideas, a few of which you can see here today on the slide. One of the winning ideas was a board game that grows with the child and actually moves from the physical offline world to the online world and ultimately to the metaverse. So these and many other examples show the power of starting with a clear trend. In this case, the need to extend the life of things we own and combining it with the power of creative crowdsourcing to create solutions for your brands and customers. So that's it. I see it's 1 minute before 10, so I think we've done pretty well on timing. I hope you've enjoyed the session with us today. If you have any questions, here's that email address again. You can also find it in the chat. Of course, many of you already have my email address, so you're welcome to use that directly. We'll be sharing the report and this recording with you afterwards, so please look out for that. And lastly, we want to invite you to look out for the sector-focused trend events coming up in March, where we take a deeper look at the trends with specific sectors in mind. So we hope to see you there. That's all for today. Thanks very much for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Goodbye.